Right,
Great.
we're recording, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone. Dan Raven-Ellison is the founder of Slowways, a giant initiative to create a national walking network that connects all of Britain's towns, cities, and national parks. He founded and led the campaign to make London the first world. Oh man, I can't talk today. He founded and led the campaign to make London the world's first national park city. Dan is a parent, guerrilla geographer, and a former geography teacher. His work focuses on challenging himself and others to see the world in new ways by combining creative exploration, geography, and communication to tackle social and environmental challenges. Dan also has the tremendous honour of being the first person to appear twice on the Living Adventurously podcast. He is an interesting chap. You can listen to our first conversation back in Living Adventurously, episode 49. Welcome, Dan. Thanks for coming back. It's great to see you again. You still have a magnificent beard. You have been called a guerrilla geographer. What is that, and what are you rebelling against exactly?
That's a great question. I think we all love geography, don't we? I mean,
Well,
anyone
I
who's
didn't at
adventure.
school. I found it extremely boring. Oxbow lakes and shipping lanes and stuff.
Yeah, but surely you're one of the world's ultimate geographers, no?
Well, I love geography now. I mean, I quitted at school before GCSE because it was so boring. And yes, now I spend my entire life loving the world large and small. So yeah, there's some sort of disconnect there between your version of geography and what was inflicted on me at school.
Just yesterday, um, there's I live in Exeter, central Exeter. I used to live in London, and there's a bridge called the Iron Bridge in Exeter. It's a very old bridge, and the council have just come along and they've tarmacked it all and redone it, but it's this horrible, brutal tarmac. And a bunch of us residents were a bit frustrated by this, so went out with dozens and dozens of chalk eggs and lots of members of the community and covered it in vines and animals and butterflies and snakes and all kinds of stuff, which was just like a very beautiful way of bringing people together. And actually, that was like a pretty sound act of guerrilla geography. In that, I think that all of us want to make places better for ourselves, whether that's our living rooms or our houses or our gardens or our street or our world. Many of us want to go and enjoy other places. Like, you've done so brilliantly through, your life and your career. And so guerrilla geography is sort of saying, well, yeah, let's just do that with intent, a bit like exploration and adventure is about going and enjoying the world with intent. But how can we do things that also bring a bit of extraordinariness and surprise and delight to places? And so everyone listening to this will know about Banksy and street art around that, which is about taking things out of place, or about guerrilla gardening, again, taking things out of place to get us thinking differently about the world, or chalking up your local bridge as a way of bringing people together. That's all guerrilla geography.
That's really nice. This week, then, I did some guerrilla geography myself. I went out into my local high street with a big placard saying 15 minutes to nature, pointing this way to try and because there's such a disconnect between people living in towns versus just down there. There's a nice bit of countryside that you probably never known. So I stood there feeling very embarrassed. And then I did my first ever bit of graffiti. I spray painted on the pavement some 15 minutes to nature signpost, which I was so pathetically nervous about doing. So
In chalk or in paint?
it was spray paint, but chalk spray paint.
Yeah, chalk spray
Um,
paint. We were using a bit of that as well. Yeah.
yeah, it was really enjoyable, but gosh, I'm such a wimp. I don't think I'm ready yet to leap into Heathrow Airport for Just Stop Oil, brave though
That,
they are. I felt so nervous, but yeah. So was that guerrilla geography what I was up to?
that was definitely guerrilla geography. I mean, but so tell me, how many people stopped and spoke to you with your sign saying 15 minutes to nature?
Um, I got considerably more ignored and quizzitive looks than conversations, but I did. There were a few people, and that was nice. But yeah, it's quite a self-conscious thing to do. But what I did once I'd drawn the line, did my spray paint was I started drawing a little green line in chalk. My thinking being, wouldn't it be great if everyone from where they were right now had a little green line from their office or school to the nearest bit of nature, which is the best option I can think of until everyone becomes an Ordnance Survey map geek like me.
I love that. It reminds me a bit of sort of arriving into like a train station in France, and there being lines all over the ground to tell you how to get through to complicated places or that kind of thing. But I think
Yeah.
that your micro adventure work as well, that in some ways that's about geography in terms of exploring and discovering places, right? But it also does the guerrilla geography bit thing for me because it's also a time-space compression in terms of challenging people to rethink how long they think it might take to go and do things, and works really well in terms of making, the sort of everyday adventure accessible and normal for people. But the thing about guerrilla geography is that quite often it's just relative, right? So um, climbing a tree for someone might actually be very radical, or in some parts of the world, going on a walk might be very radical. I walked across Mexico City. That was very, very radical, both in
Wow.
the
Yeah.
context of like Mexico City, but also the nature of, I think there was expectation around walking in that kind of environment as well. So I think that there's a lot of guerrilla geography in you, as well as a lot of love for geography, I reckon.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. Well, my big mission at the moment is trying to work out how to show people that there is more nature and wildness close to them than they perhaps realize, and to counter this thinking that going to nature is only worth it if you go at the weekend for a special outing, or you go in the summer holiday for your actual holiday. How to try and fit 15 minutes of nature into your lunch break, stuff like that. So how would you suggest because there's a real disconnect, isn't there, between us, society, and nature? And so I'm trying to bridge that gap by getting people to spend 15 minutes in nature feels to me a stepping stone, but I can't quite figure out how to do that beyond preaching to the converted.
Yeah, so I actually think that there's an interesting challenge in terms of there not being a word for people. People sometimes talk about the idea of things being more than human, right? In terms of the rest of nature. For me, that doesn't feel particularly satisfactory. I kind of feel
No.
like missing a word that deals well with the idea that we're part of nature, so that's nature. So then what are we and what is the rest of nature? And more than human, it's not a word, is it? Maybe we say it very quickly, it become a word. But so I think our framing straight off is not very helpful on some of these things. I think that some people within the environment and ecological movement, when they're talking about connecting with nature or ecology, they're often thinking at a certain scale, which makes sense for them in terms of a landscape or a habitat, but misses out on the opportunity to engage people with nature at a much smaller scale that might be more relevant to them. So two examples might be that for a very young child, being under an oak tree, 500 species of wildlife, or the complexity of an oak tree may actually give them as much, if not more, nature than the fact that they might also be in a bigger, more complicated environment. And in our house, we've always done our bit of rewilding by just allowing spiders to live in the house. And sometimes, you don't have to necessarily go 15 minutes to go and find nature. We had a spider called Gary living with us for quite some period of time. We had like at the bottom of the windowsill, there was a big sort of like graveyard of lots of like red splats for a while from where sort of they were like ejecting their sort of fly carcasses and whatever else they were doing on the bottom of the windowsill. But that is also nature, right? So the way we treat insects in our house and arachnids in our houses, I think it's part of that. And so I think that even the idea that you have to go 15 minutes to nature maybe is missing out on the point
Mm.
for some people that actually that. But I take it even further than that on the scale point, which is, and I love this thinking really is that our bodies are primarily bacteria and viruses that are non-human DNA. So we are spaceships, we are habitats transporting nature, us, through the universe. And so actually even reconnecting with our own bodies is another way of thinking about how we can connect with nature as well, when you begin to think of it that way, and all the little animals and cellular organisms living all over us.
Yeah,
That tapeworm, embrace that tapeworm is kind
yeah.
of
Good for weight loss as well. I was reading just yesterday about one of the problems with communicating about climate change is that the climate, the air, it's sort of invisible. You don't see the carbon, and it's hard to sort of connect with it. And this piece I was writing then started to describe how every time you breathe in, you're breathing in millions of molecules of argon that was from the Big Bang itself, and you're breathing in molecules of oxygen that Plato or Aristotle inhaled, and they're right now within your very veins. And actually, we're as immersed in the air as if you're a fish underwater. And I found that a really helpful way of thinking about something really big by actually making it as tiny and as personalized as possible.
yeah, I love that. Love that.
Yeah. You're very good at trying to communicate big stories in simple and catchy kind of ways. And just today, actually, I was rewatching your UK in 100 seconds video, which is an overhead drone video of you walking through the different landscapes that make up the UK. So you dash through 5 seconds worth of towns, for example, and 1 second of orchards or something like that, and then it's about 28 seconds of cow pasture. So really, really visual ways of telling those sorts of stories. You're really, really good at that sort of thing. And you're good at making people see things in a different way. So what's the weirdest thing you've done that make people go, you what? What's this about? What are you on about here?
That's a good question. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I'll answer that in a moment, but going back,
Okay.
so just recently, after making UK in 100 seconds, I cut together some footage I had from doing the Netherlands and UK national parks in 100 seconds to make Earth in 100 seconds. And so it's shot from above. It's essentially a 100-meter walk, 100-second film, and every second of the film is 1% of how we're using land. And we've done some activities with children in primary and secondary schools, and you ask them what percentage of the Earth do you think is used for settlement and buildings, and they're like 50, 60% is often the guess. And you say, how much do you think is for cows? And if they're in urban kids, they'll say maybe 3 or 4% is used for cows and grazing in pastures. And they're wildly out. It's almost the opposite. Not quite, but it's almost the opposite in terms of those things. So those 100-second films are really important to me, and I think can be really useful for a lot of anyone interested in sort of thinking about the world, right? Which hopefully is all of us, to help us really understand how we're using and misusing Earth, both in the UK context, but also more widely as well, and challenge us to have better policies, both policies we set for ourselves as individuals, but as a country as well. I think that, yeah.
Sorry, before you go on to answer the question I actually asked you, I've got another thing now. It's just that I really enjoyed that 100 seconds thing, and it did get me thinking. It'd be interesting to have like a split screen side by side, 100 seconds of the UK or the world as it is versus a hypothetical 100 seconds of what the world could be, while still ensuring that everyone has enough calories and protein to eat, and what a rewilded, nature-friendly future could look like. That would be quite an interesting. So there's some homework for you to do.
I would absolutely love to see that, and I'd love to see different versions by different people in terms of what they.
I see you're passing this off to someone else. I see.
Well, I think I definitely give it a shot myself, but it's definitely complicated, isn't it?
Yes, yes, for sure. Yes.
And what was the question I didn't answer?
Well, before I ask you that question you didn't answer, I'm going to diverge again to point out to anyone who doesn't know the website Our World in Data. And there's a woman called Hannah Ritchie who writes this fantastic newsletter, and she is my go-to source for clever, thought-through, backed-up data on pretty much anything at all. I presume you know that website, yeah, but I personally love it.
Our World in Data is actually fantastic. But one of the challenges with making both the UK and Earth in 100 seconds is one of the most. A lot of us would like to have more intact and wild forest, right? A lot of us would like to have more intact savanna and grasslands and mangroves and those kinds of things. And we all probably, maybe a lot of us would think that 1 or 2% of the planet being covered in buildings isn't tragic, in terms of like what it could be in people's imaginations. But, in reality, while the physical buildings take up 1 to 2%, about 2/3 of the planet of the sort of land mass of the planet ultimately is used by people in cities in terms of consuming those spaces, either for arable land or for cows or whatever else. So although a lot of the planet looks like it's very green, in reality, you could argue that it's just a big slightly wild back sort of garden of cities in terms of enabling those cities to function. But in terms of the data, the thing that's really hard to do well is around how much that grassland is actually really great for wildlife or good for wildlife, and there happens to be some cows there as well, or really bad because basically cows have got complete sort of primacy over that land. So we actually need far better data on how grasslands are being used around the world. And actually the reason why I would struggle probably to tell you on the slider of how much the world should be grassland or not, that is grazing land or pasture, is that we definitely need better data in that space. So what I did for this film, Earth in 100 Seconds, was use IPCC data, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They've got reasonable data on land use, and the film was based on that.
Okay, good stuff. Yeah, I think some of my biggest mind shifting epiphanies on the world in the last few years have been to do with land use. And 70% of habitable land's agriculture land. And when I first learned that, I was like, yeah, fair enough. We've all got to eat. Sorry, wildlife, but we're all hungry. That's kind of just the way it is. You can't get rid of half the world. But then to realize that the ridiculous variety in surface area that's required to make a meal of different types of food just completely and utterly blew my mind. And that to me seems a really good way whereby what you have at lunch has a direct impact on the world. And that seems something like, because things like carbon emissions, it's quite hard for normal people to get into, but everyone's interested in what they have for lunch. So the land use of my lunch has come to really fascinate me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that for me as well, like I challenge anyone to look at either the UK in 100 seconds or Earth in 100 seconds and not to see things in the way that I'm going to describe now, right? So, essentially about 5% of the footprint of Britain is urban. A massive share, like a massive share. I think, I can't remember the number off the top of my head from that particular film, but it's like a third of the UK or something is used for grazing. It's more when you consider the fact that about half of all arable land you see, half of crops is then fed to livestock as well. So regardless of what your politics are, in my mind, there is ample space not only for radical scale renaturing and rewilding of the landscape, like at a massive scale, but also for more affordable housing for people who can't afford houses at the moment. It is literally just set aside, the rewilding and ecological agenda that I care about sort of deeply. Just in terms of housing, I've got a 21-year-old son. In terms of him being able to afford a house in the future, essentially the way I see it is that because some people have an aesthetic where they would rather see cows and sheep in the countryside than an alternative land use. They would rather that their own children can't afford to live in a house in a few years' time than to lose, more of that aesthetic. And considering how ecologically awful a lot of pasture land is for the environment, I think it's just tragic that we can't get our house in order as a society to release a few percentage points of what is currently pasture and grazing, to have more affordable housing, and also sweeping, beautiful, large-scale ecological corridors that both people and wildlife can move through in the country as well. Loads of space for it. Just need to get our act together.
Yeah, I think a big issue here is something that I would have felt really strongly until embarrassingly recently, really, which is I love the English countryside. It's so beautiful. It's what I grew up in. It's the green and pleasant land. It's beautiful. This is the way the countryside has looked for thousands of years. This is nature. This is perfect. Until you start to realize, hang on, firstly, this isn't what the countryside has always looked like. This isn't how we have always farmed. This isn't even how we farmed 100 years ago. And therefore, what do we want our future to look like? Do we want one that's nature filled with places for people to live? And I think once you start to learn about the way our land is used for industrial agriculture, it becomes quite exciting because the solutions are relatively simple and they are so good for people and the planet and the people who work on it. It just to me feels like there's so many win-win-win options here if you can just get people to look differently at the way that land is used.
Yeah, and I think that this is the thing. I think that there's lots of people who maybe could buy into the story as well. Like one of my frustrations of looking at the edges of places like where I live in Exeter is there's a lot of car-dependent suburbia that sprawls at a relatively low density. And again, it comes down to like an aesthetic choice. Actually, higher density areas mean you can have more nature, but you can also have more public services for things like buses and trains and schools and doctors and all the things that people need that you want people to walk to. So you said the 15 minutes to nature, bang on, or less, but also 15 minutes to all those services as well, please.
Yeah,
So
the
why we
15-minute cities.
yeah, so why we would sprawl rather than go denser into areas that are not performing for us, either for affordability or for ecology. Like I say, we just got to get our act together. We've got to get onto it. We know the solutions. We know what we need to do. The time is now. Let's get on with it. And I think that these films, I think, just sort of give people, when you look at a graph or a bar chart, it gives you an idea of the data, but it's a bit sterile. I think seeing a human and a human story and giving you a sense of space and scale, the geography of that, I think helps people understand the gravitas of the injustice of how land is being used currently.
Mm. Yeah, very much so. And so I know you're a big fan of rewilding, and access to the countryside. But when I go out wandering around the countryside at the moment, there's just litter everywhere, Lucozade bottles, vapes chucked absolutely everywhere. So isn't giving more access to more people in more places just rife for more problems and more disputes between, say, farmers and non-farmers?
I think that it's important we don't infantilize people and we don't sort of like, um, not be in a situation where we don't put trust in people to have respectful relationships with nature and the places around them. But we have an education system which is quite utilitarian, quite reductionist, quite stripped back, that doesn't give children and young people and adults maybe all the opportunities they could do to build up the sort of skill sets and some of the values and understandings that are needed when you're visiting, the natural world, or a place that doesn't belong to you. you know and so I think that we need to have more rights and more access to the landscape around us. But definitely, like many other people who would like there to be more access, argue for, it has to go hand in hand with the right support in terms of sort of education, essentially, and learning opportunities for people to be respectful. And of course, there's going to be situations when things go slightly wrong, but we only have to look to Scotland or Australia or Canada or swathing parts of the United States where there's more nature, by the way, and bigger nature, to see actually people have respectful relationships. It doesn't always go right. It's not always sort of working out as you'd like it to be. But our behavior in terms of that relationship with nature is a bit bizarre the other way as well. So I often think, as a thought experiment, if there was somewhere in the UK where we had our last two lynx, or the last pack of wolves, there's no way we'd be thinking, oh, well, let's just get rid of them because then it's going to be easier for the farmers. You'd be looking to India or parts of Southern Africa or North America, where you'd make it work and you'd want to make sure that they were looked after, those animals, and that farmers were compensated if things were going wrong. So I think that's like an example looking in the other directions, where the relationship with nature is just a bit wrong in terms of our respect for it, from both ends, both the land manager end, but also maybe from the citizen consumer end as well. Yeah, we need more empathy and more learning in this space. But I think that it'd be quite hard, I think, to imagine to just give lots of people lots more rights and just to assume they're going to get it right. And that there's not going to be conflict without there having maybe a slightly tricky transition and also needing to have, that opportunity to learn at the same time. And what do you think on the issue?
Hey, this is my podcast. I ask the questions here. I think, well, the reason I asked you was because I'm trying to write about this in my book, and I thought you might be able to give me some clever answers, because I'm stuck in a real chicken and egg conundrum, which is that I think the reason, let's just take litter as a simple but invisible issue that's, in my mind, a symptom of nature disconnection, which is I think people walking around the countryside drop litter because they don't feel any responsibility to it. They don't feel any connection to it. They wouldn't be chucking litter if it was their best friend's field or their own garden, but because it's just a random countryside, they don't feel the connection. So getting more people into more places more often will hopefully then get people more connected and caring and wanting to fix it and feeling a bond to make this place better. But how do you get to that position without, as you say, the tricky transition period? You talk about education, but from being a geography teacher how ridiculously busy schools are. Where do you propose fitting into the working week? Hey guys, let's learn the countryside code. Where does that fit into education?
That bit's easy if you have a government in power that understand the value of children doing any number of types of field trip work, whether it's around heritage or nature, whether it's about learning about other cultures, about experiential learning, inquiry-based learning, exploration-based learning, rather than fragua-based learning, you know.
What do you mean by that? Oh,
Well,
stuffing people.
yeah, just stuffing people with
Okay.
like random information. I mean, like even like, why would you? What? This is the point I was going to make earlier, actually, about my bridge and the chalking. We are about half the people who crossed the bridge. We said, "Would you like to draw on this?" They were saying that they couldn't draw,
Oh,
because
yes.
they learnt in school. They were told or learnt in school that they couldn't do the right kind of line marking to fit the education system. So learned that they couldn't do it. The number of young people I know who love music or drama going into school, and somehow school manages to squeeze all the love from them. And I was going to bring this up earlier in reference to geography, in that when you're a child, you love adventures. You love climbing trees, you love sniffing ponds, you love making dams, you love all the stuff that is like intrinsic to geography. I love playing hide and seek and stuff as a kid, like all this stuff. We love all that stuff. And somehow the education system takes something that we all love and squeezes it from us. And in reality, I think that if every child was to visit a farm, right, or every child was to go and look at the night sky in a dark sky reserve, whatever, then actually they would want to maybe respect and trust those places more. But as a potentially unpopular thought, but something that I struggle with in return, which maybe you might have thoughts on, is I think that maybe you take the analogy of people littering a field, whatever, and say, well, you wouldn't do that in your back garden, and so why would you do it there? And when I think about our relationship with wildlife and animals, I think we tell children at a certain point when they're very young, they have the epiphany that they're eating like the chicken they were reading about in their children's book, or the Peppa Pig. They suddenly realize they're eating Peppa Pig, right? And not only do they suddenly realize that they're like eating their childhood animal friends, right? But parents say to them at the same time, yeah, but don't worry about it. That's what we do, right? But not only but not only is that the message, but the message is that you can have like an unquantifiable, unlimited amount with no moral like issues, number of chickens or pigs, whatever you want, right? But then we then say to them, oh, but look at this incredible bird over here. Oh, it's so beautiful. And actually, it's the fact that it's rare and not as effective as the more common birds that is the reason why we prize it, bizarrely, right? And we say, no, you can't harm those animals. You can't harm that life, but you can have an unlimited number of these guys for whatever reason. And I just wonder whether within some of our environmental link, like thinking and learning, if we're saying to children, you can completely control and trash and consume as much of this type of nature as you want, but this type of nature over here, you need to protect. I wonder if one failure there or one sort of argument completely undermines the other. And so, yeah, I don't know what you think of that. Like, is that a thing? Could you imagine that as a theory playing out? The idea that if we tell children at a young age that actually you only have to care about some but not others.
Yeah, interesting. I definitely see a dissonance, and I've been writing and reading at the moment about passenger pigeons, which were the most numerous bird on the planet in North America, and there were just wonderful giant flocks, tens of miles across, with millions and millions of birds that would take literally hours to fly overhead. Incredible. And then in 1914, September the 1st, Martha, the final passenger pigeon, went extinct. And yet nobody now today, no one alive has ever seen a passenger pigeon. So walk down the street, 99% of people aren't sad because there are no passenger pigeons. And yet the world we live in we kill 76 billion chickens every year. So to have 76 billion chickens in our world and zero passenger pigeons is definitely some weird dissonance in that.
Well, yeah, and it's like I know that that I'm not necessarily making the case here that necessarily you say that no one should have any meat or that no one should. I'm not actually making the case with this argument. What I'm equating it to in part is the scale of that use of nature and wildlife and other sentient beings in relation to like the ethics of why it is that people would care about the world. And so I think that in reality, it's like we bring up the issue of littering. So yes, it's really awful that there's loads of plastic in the ocean and we can see pictures of that. A lot of plastic is really horrible. It's microplastic. It's also relatively inert to a fish or a bird or whatever else. Yes, plastics is awful, but actually being hunted at scale is far worse. And we don't tend to tell the story so much of the large scale, consumption in the same way, because the BBC and other channels, struggle with that story because audiences find it hard. But that means we get to keep the idea we can have an unlimited amount of fish life, which is wildlife, by the way. I know that David Attenborough's new program, film Ocean, deals with this in terms of bottom, trawling. But I think it's all connected. So I wonder, with the point about people littering the countryside, whether it's partially about kids getting the opportunity to go and learn outside and go and experience these places with the people who manage that land to say, this is why you need to do it. But I also wonder what other messaging we're giving children, or we're having within our communities from an earlier stage, which means that we feel like less likely to look after not only the environment but ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think the certainly, it seems undoubted to me that the more time you can get young people, well, any people, to spend out in countryside is going to be beneficial for people's physical health, mental health, but also these issues of how is our world working and what future are we looking towards.
Yeah, I know you're saying anything about countryside and going out to 15 minutes to nature, but another area of my work, which you may have a question on, is around national park cities, and I didn't know if you had a question around that, but again, it's like we don't necessarily have to go out for 15 minutes or go out somewhere else to find the nature. We don't have to go out to the big national park somewhere else. We can also say, well, what is where I am? So when I'm looking at my window here, actually, literally out my window that you can see behind me here, two interesting things. So within like 1 minute, well, actually out my window, I can see some breeding peregrine falcons and their fledglings,
Oh,
which
wow.
you mean like pterodactyls through the skies at the moment. And then there's a street fight that happens at the moment between local resident neighbours, half of whom feed peanut butter sandwiches to the local badgers, and half of whom want to get rid of the badgers completely because they dig up their tulips.
Right.
And it's all happening right here. And the thing about national park cities, or thinking about sort of cities being wilder, is acknowledging the value of that life, which is immediately where we are, and thinking about not just going out to greener, healthier, wilder nature, but thinking about how we can do that immediately where we live as well. And I think a big part of that is about tuning into it, as well as being able to create more of it as well.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, given your little explanation of the national park city concept, which I love, by the way, I'm a big fan.
Oh, thanks. And I've got some cool news around national park cities as well, which is very exciting, which I didn't know if you know about. So, really short, if you look at national parks around the world, there are national parks in every single habitat, internationally recognized habitat, including deserts and glaciers. But for some reason, not urban areas, but London, where I used to live, there's as many trees as people. There are 15,000 species of wildlife, and the badgers and the peregrine falcons and the cormorants and whatever else that are there are just as valuable and just as wonderful and just as fast and just as beautiful as those that live in the countryside that live in the city. And I don't think that, so that urban life is worth less than rural life. And I'm sure many people listening to this would agree. So the initial starting point was saying, well, so if a desert or a glacier could be a national park, like why not a city which is far more abundant with life? But then coming to realize, working with like hundreds of campaigners as we campaign to make London a national park city, that the real issue is that national park thinking is missing from cities. And what I mean by that is large scale, long term, holistic, systems based thinking that is story driven, that gives a purpose to a city beyond watching Netflix and eating and sleeping and commuting. The purpose of the city is to have a better relationship with nature and to enjoy ourselves. And whether that's the story of the city, but where anyone inside that landscape, anywhere, is able to contribute to it by doing things that make their own lives or places around them greener, healthier, wilder as well. And the distinct difference between, I think, a traditional rural national park and a national park city is that there's a mantra that, you may have heard before, this idea of like leaving no trace. I'm sure you've heard that term before, right? So when you visit a wild space, you want to leave no trace, or wilder space, you want to leave no trace. But in an urban environment, like us chalky on the bridge, you want to leave a trace. You want to leave that city in the future greener, wilder than it was when you found it. So it's very different. A national park city in many ways is a citizens' national park city, or national park, whereas in a traditional national park, quite often for taxpayers, other than in this country, some of the landowners that are there, it's largely a consumer space. So it's a very, very different kind of relationship that we're having with it. And the news I have that people may have not heard is that so London became a national park city in 2019, Adelaide a couple of years later. So desperately excited by this that Chattanooga, a city of 200,000 people in Tennessee, became the world's
Wow.
third national park city. So this is a southern southeast state, a small city on the banks of the River Tennessee, becoming a national park city. I mean, absolutely incredible.
Wow, congratulations. That's fantastic. There's so much that I love about the National Park City concept, and just relevant to the conversation we've been having today. One is the reminder that nature's not just over there, it's everywhere, like in our lungs, the air we're breathing in a city, the cleaner air from the trees growing, all that side of things. It's also a reminder that wonderful though David Attenborough and all his programs are, I think we have a big problem that we think of nature as equaling David Attenborough hugging a gorilla thousands of miles away from home, and that makes us devalue not value the stuff that's literally outside the front door. So what you're saying here about that the nature on your doorstep is just as valuable is really, really important. And the third thing is that I learned really through you is just to think of the diversity of species in cities. I grew up in the lovely, wonderful Yorkshire Dales, upland sheep farming territory. I love it there, but sad as it is for me to admit, I bet there's a heck of a lot more wildlife and species in London than there were on those lovely sheep moors where I grew up. So yeah, there's lots and lots of ways that I think the national park cities are fantastic. But I mean, we're recording, it's a hot June day. There are people now, God rest their souls, stuck on the tube in rush hour. Do they honestly feel like they're in a national park, or is this just all some sort of flim flam spin from people like you?
I think that it's just about, it really helps when people widen their aesthetic lens in terms of what landscape and what place is. Okay. And what I mean by that is that the urban environment is a habitat, and it's a complicated habitat, just like the habitats that many other sort of species around the world live in. It's the habitat we live in, and then there are loads of other species that have managed to sort of thrive within that particular environment as well. And the reason why it's not flim flam, okay, is because it's not about giving some greenwashing award to some city where our ancestors already made the city green, like, you know, way to go, Vienna, right? It's about saying, what can we do to make sure that future generations inherit a greener, healthier, wilder city from where we are now? So it's not saying that where we are now is good enough. And actually, I would absolutely love to see a Joburg, a Freetown, a Nairobi National Park city next. And it's not that there isn't informal housing there where people are really struggling in terms of clean water, sanitation, rubbish, often like lack of tree cover and this kind of things. It's precisely because in many of those places, the vision and the aspiration is saying, what if our city was a national park city? And having commitment to residents to think about how the city can be greener, healthier, wilder, cooler there in the future is what it's all about. A city cannot become a national park city unless there is a community of practice there wanting to create those changes. And yes, it'd be easy to focus on the caves that we like traveling through in London on the tube. And by the way, apparently there are multiple species of mosquito and different vortexes within the London Underground because of what's going on there. So we could, you could talk about the biodiversity of those caves and in their own right. Do you know how old the oldest Londoner is? If you were to guess the age of the oldest Londoner, how old would you say they are?
Oh, I'd say there's someone who's 100 there.
100. The oldest Londoner is a Totteridge yew tree, which is over 2,000 years old. So that yew tree was just poking its head out the ground as London was forming.
Wow.
So when we're thinking about managing the city for the future, we need to be thinking in timescales that are not just generational human timescales. We should be thinking about the context of the landscape as a whole. And that's the thing, when people are planning Yellowstone, they're not just thinking about it in terms of like short-term political terms of 3 or 4 years, or who owns that little garden over there. They're thinking about it over hundreds, if not thousands of years in terms of ecological restoration and opportunities. So it'd be very easy to sort of like look at the national park city and say it's flim flam and get on with your life and remain disconnected from nature and unhopeful and not want to contribute towards like that vision. Alternatively, you can buy into the story and you can be part of something really beautiful.
Yeah, in over the last few years, I've had times of real despair about the state of the planet and really getting down, and even more so at just how apathetic and people seem to be. Like, very good friends of mine just literally don't care, and I've been getting so down about it. But I found what's a good way out of this is to stop thinking about all the problems, of which there are millions, and instead to start looking at the solutions. And suddenly life becomes really fun then, because you start thinking, wow, right, I'm not going to anymore get depressed about air pollution in London, because that just gets me depressed. What I'm going to do now is think, imagine in 100 years if there were 10% more trees. That would be fantastic. Let's go plant some trees. And the sort of hopeful solutions is so much nicer way to look at the world. And the Native American, there's a sort of tradition there of seventh generation planning, where you make your plans for what will be good, not for just for me, but for my great 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 grandchild 7 generations from now. And suddenly life seems much more fun then, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? I think that when you know John Alexander has written a brilliant book called sort of Citizens, which is all around this idea of people moving from being the subject of a monarchy and being told what they must do and having basically no rights to be moving into a consumer space where people feel maybe like they've got more power, but actually they're just doing what they've been told by corporates, which is buy stuff to feel better. And then you move into what he argues we're moving into now, which is around being citizens. And obviously, we've had the idea of citizens for a long time, but this is more about how can we work together independently and collectively to make our lives better, quite often by getting organised locally. And they're not necessarily complicated things, like with the National Park City, like with, these things we can do. It's stuff like walking more, planting more stuff, organising street parties. But I think that these things which we can do, which make our lives better and richer and the world better and even extend our lives, these sort of healthy activities. I think there's like a number of things that local authorities and council and government can do just to liberate people. But because they are stuck in this sort of consumer space, they're failing to leverage the power of citizens to help them with particular problems. And an example I'll give on that is, on my little watershed that goes into the River Exe, we've got a culverted river that goes down through the valley with a road over the top of it. There's about 12,000 houses within the watershed, and down the bottom is a sewage outfall pipe. And basically, when it rains an awful lot and people have been for a lot of dumps, if that all happens at the same time, the sewage outflow pipe opens and loads of sewage goes out to the river, and it essentially means that the Exe is not swimmable, which is tragically sad. Exeter would be a phenomenally more beautiful and enjoyable city if you could hear people swimming in the river and screaming raucously and enjoying themselves, especially when the salmon come up river and start, brushing past them maybe. I'd love to have a swimmable Exe. And the national narrative, understandably politically, is around the fact that water companies are completely ripped off the government, completely ripped off consumers. And the impact of that means that we end up with loads of shit in our rivers, right? That's basically the thing. But the thing is, there's an interesting thing where there's another deficit within our water infrastructure, which is that we haven't got enough reservoirs and we haven't got enough water storage. And we know that if it's been a hot summer, we're patient with water companies for some reason then, and we get a bit angry maybe, but a bit more patient, and everyone will obey to hose pipe bans. So the thing that I've started playing with recently, and I've tried to tap up Southwest Water to help me understand this specifically, is of the 12,000 homes that are within my watershed, how many people would have to use half the water they would usually use during the day, or delay their water usage, or empty their water butt to refill when there's a major rainfall event, to delay or store enough water in the water system to stop our sewage outfall for our watershed going into the river. And that information has not been shared with us as residents, or it's not coordinated. And I think that the cultural attitude in the country is that water companies just need to fix it. And everyone's mapping it, and everyone's very angry, and people can't swim outside, and people are getting ill and whatever else. But people aren't asking so much, where is the geographic information that could be used to do a community WhatsApp-based campaign to stop when I take a shit, my shit going in the river. After all, it is my shit, right? So I think there's this a really interesting space to explore there further as communities in terms of how can we get better organized to not just do planting and street parties and things, but what are some of the other big issues we face at the moment where with a bit more support from councils or government and a bit more coordination between us, actually we can make a big difference.
That I love that idea of you could have like no, I won't even suggest that. It's a terrible idea, but I love
What's
your
a terrible idea? What's a terrible idea?
A scheduled WhatsApp poo allocation time for each street through the day. Terrible idea, but no, I love your idea of because suddenly that becomes real, doesn't it? Of, oh look, if us 12,000 houses do X, then the river is not full of poo.
You say that, right? So it's like, you want to delay the flow. So there's some things where if it was electricity, there's lots of smart people telling us that we need to use sensors and stuff so that our washing machines only go on at a certain time of the day based on power usage. So what if our washing machines and dishwashers actually started working at the time of the day when they're going to have the least amount of water going directly into the Victorian sewage system, which is similar to the water butt idea. But why not say to people, there's going to be a storm later, can you try and do your poo earlier? And the thing is that 90% of the community may like not do that. But if people like me and you, I don't know what your bowel movements are like, but if we're a bit more sort of like flexible on when in the day we can get and go for our wee or our poo, then make a difference. Or that again, like if you live in some of the drier parts of the world, you'll know to either do showers or you flush when you do a poo, but not with a wee. These kinds of things. So the point is, it doesn't have to be everybody, but how many of us would it take to mean that for us here in Exeter, we can start swimming with the salmon and the eggs?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that is fantastic. And that's a classic example of where you're so good at finding stories towards things. And my temptation now is to launch off into a 45-minute discussion of river swimming, because that's what I really love that. But I'm realizing that however far we are into our conversation, I haven't yet actually asked you about the thing that I was intending to ask you about in our interview. So I'm going to do a segue switch now. A screech towards your big project of slow ways, which you've been working on for ages. We've talked about it before. It's fantastic. Maybe you can give a little summary of what the slow ways is. But as far as I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in our country we've got the best public footpath network in the world. I think it's pretty amazing. Anyway, the stuff we have. Do we actually need more walking routes?
So we have an incredible walking network. And so slow ways
is our footpath system the best in the world?
I don't know about that. There's other cultures around the world where people have open access if they're responsible, which is where we were talking.
Of course, yeah, of course.
And I think that there people might have far more freedoms and far more access.
But we do have brilliant channeled footpaths. Like on a map, you can look. Oh, I can go from there to there. Loads of them everywhere you live. Once you start looking at maps.
That's it. They're largely all over the place. Although if you're in East Anglia, you're not served as well as you are in parts of Dorset, for example, where the fields are smaller and you're far more packed in terms of your paths. But you go up to Scotland and there's legally far more access, but actually the path network isn't as strong. And sometimes you might want to opt actually to have a better path rather than having more access.
Yes, yeah. I've made that mistake many times in Scotland of thinking, I'll just walk from there to there in a straight line, and suddenly you're knee deep in a bog and totally exhausted. So an actual path network is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So basically, in many ways, slow ways is just a really old idea. So the idea is what's a good way to get there, and it's what humans have done from before we were humans. We were asking each other, what's a good way to get from A to B? And so a number of years ago, started up this grassroots project with volunteers suggesting walking routes connecting all of our towns, cities, national landscapes, and then going through a massive peer review process of people reviewing, surveying, and verifying the routes. And verified routes are routes that have been checked by these 3 different people. And where we are now is there's 140,000 kilometres of routes going right across Great Britain, up to the Shetlands and a lot of the Scottish Islands. 70% have been reviewed at least once, 60% have had at least one positive review, a third are verified. But a fact that I really love is that of the 10,000 routes in the network, 4,000 are rated 4 or 5 stars. If you wanted to walk from Inverness to Falmouth, we could give you 4 or 5 star rated routes the whole way through.
Amazing.
You could walk between most towns and cities in the country on 4 and 5 star rated routes. So if you wanted to just go shopping in the next town, or you're getting back from a festival, or if you just want to walk something off and get home and do a mini pilgrimage, Slowways is a really great way of doing all that.
So I think, sorry to interrupt you a bit for clarifying. I think one thing you haven't pointed out is that Slowways is not just a really scenic way to do a scenic hike from here to there over the next mountain. It's linking a town to a town in a convenient way, isn't it?
Exactly. So there's 10 sort of design principles, and it's trying to find routes that are as direct, safe, accessible, enjoyable as possible. Not getting distracted necessarily by strategic paths that might have their own design methodology that might be about being more scenic, for example. But each slow way can actually have multiple route options. So that means that if there might be a drier way or a quicker way or a more accessible way or a more scenic way, where I am down in the southwest, if you want to get between Budleigh Salterton and Exmouth, you can choose between the southwest coast path, which is very slippery and muddy and very, very hilly, or you can follow an abandoned railway line that Susterans have turned into a cycle route that's fully accessible, which also makes a loop. So you kind of got those options. And so we're always trying to tease out and find those best options and review them so the best options float towards the top for different users as well. And you know what? I think that if you're happy using an OS map and you're happy looking at a path and risking that path will be okay if you don't know it, then what we're doing may not be useful to you because you feel that you are comfortably adventurous enough just to go and do that. But I think that even the most hardened explorer will sometimes have the confidence to ask someone on the ground, what's the best way to go? And that's all this is doing. And in reality, while as an able-bodied man who feels very confident moving through this country, I feel very confident going on nearly any path in the country. There's no-go zones anywhere that I can think I've ever been to. But there are millions of people, and it will be at me at some point as well, who, for whatever reason, have additional needs that are not currently served in terms of the level of information that's available for knowing whether or not a route is okay for you or not. So I feel like if you're part of the able-bodied fitness well-being crowd, you're very well served with lots of people sharing the fastest way to run from one place to another. But if you are a parent with twins and a pushchair, if you're an adaptive cyclist or a wheelchair user, if you are a wheelchair user who wants to find a dark sky to do some astronomy, if you are, you just go through all these different user groups. There's so many different user groups that essentially aren't being served at the moment. So what we're going to be doing with Slowways going forward is we've created this giant network connects up all of our towns and cities with these sort of beautiful linear routes. But we are crowdfunding at the moment to redevelop the platform to give other people the ability to create their own networks that have all those user needs and many others as well that suit what they need. So it's almost like with Slowways, we learned how we can collaborate with thousands of volunteers across the country to create this giant walking network. Well, if you live in a village, a town, or a city, if you are a non-profit organization, what's the network you would create for your community? And I think what that means is that if, for example, you are an adaptive cyclist who really wants to go and see dark skies, then if you could follow an organization that specialized in that, how great would that be? And the slightly visionary thing here as well within this is to say, well, I used to be a geography teacher. What if I had showed my year 7, so my 11-year-old families of 11-year-olds, what if I'd shared with them 10 great local circular walking routes for exploring nature in the local area? And what if all other local schools did the same? Not only could you create networks for local families for your school, but actually we could create a national network of family-friendly routes by lots of similar organizations doing similar things where they are. So we've done an incredible job with Slowways over the last 5 years. And the next version of this is just to hand over those skills so that other organizations can do something similar to what we've done, but for their communities with their design principles and needs.
Yeah, I love what you're doing. One thing I have to really regularly remind myself is that I find moving through our country probably easier than almost anyone in the country because I'm a geek at reading maps. I'm good at running up hills. I like riding my bike. If there's a no trespassing sign, I just jump over it and ignore it because I know that if the farmer finds me, I'm a posh white bloke and I'm quite a cheerful chap, and we'll soon have a friendly chat with the farmer, and he's unlikely to shoot me. And so the countryside is mine completely, and so therefore I love Ordnance Survey maps. And I think quite often I very much take for granted how easy it is for me to go out adventuring, exploring, all those sorts of things. And I think what there's so many aspects of what you're doing, but one great thing is that to just make it more accessible to more people. So for women to find ways that other women recommend that they feel safe traveling, or for minority groups to not feel that they're going to be intimidated moving through the countryside, stuff that literally never crosses my mind as a fit white bloke. So yeah, it's a really, really good way of opening up the country to more people, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. And I do think it's interesting that when you think about the other sort of navigation mapping apps that are out there, they do an absolutely fantastic job for people who are able-bodied and people who are confident in those spaces. And it's just thinking about, well, how can we do a better job for other people? And I think that enabling, like, not me as an able-bodied white man, similarly to you, that feels like I can go anywhere in the country and not feel fearful and feel skilled to do that. I think that there's all kinds of moments when actually my experience of the countryside would be enriched if I could follow in the footsteps of a person or organization who I knew had expertise in that environment. That would mean that maybe I would go a slightly longer or shorter way to take in a discovery that I otherwise wouldn't have had, whether it's nature or culture or art, whatever it might be. And in my mind, it's almost like you can go to any village or town in the country, and actually you'll find those little walking guides around the place that tell you great walks for going and discovering churches or doing some art or going and seeing like local nature reserves and that kind of stuff. But civic society as a whole, across the non-profit sector, has not got organized together to share that information collectively in one place in a way that's super easy for individuals to follow and use, but also in a way to help other people who have their interests and needs follow in their footsteps as well. And so I would love to be able to visit different parts of the country and be able to very quickly be able to find the best 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometer route that's going to meet the needs of, you know, my family, which in its own right can be full of very different needs, but also to show me what's interesting to discover about that place. Because, you know, ultimately that line on the OS map shows you a way to go, but it doesn't tell you everything about that place. And taking it back a bit more deeply into the geography for a moment as well, I think the power in this is that what routes do for us and what paths do for us is they transform spaces into places that we can have relationships with. And there's a famous geographer, philosophical geographer, Yifu Tuan, who talks about the idea of space being freedom and place being security. The idea that you long for one and you need the other. So we long for space, we long for freedom, but we need places because places, like our homes, give us security. And in geography, you create a place out of something by putting a boundary around it, giving it a name, giving it an identity. So somewhere like the Southwest Coast Path, if that was just an entanglement of random paths going through the landscape, then people couldn't share story or guidance or ideas or write books or make films like the Salt Path about the Southwest Coast Path if it didn't have that identity. So in our communities, us taking the path network and transforming them into routes we can create stories and love and guidance around, we can give other people who need more security the confidence to follow in their footsteps. And the fun thing we're doing with Slowways at the moment, even without the crowdfunder we're doing at the moment, is volunteers are creating a 4,000 kilometer, 277 route-legged route going the length of Great Britain, going through all of our national parks and London National Park City as well. And so it's starting off as this idea of volunteers creating this network of routes that connect up all of our national parks. But at a certain point, enough people do it, enough people follow that idea that it can become consolidated in our imaginations and become real. So although for Slowways, we've created this big national network and creating this national like trail going through all of our national parks, imagine if you could then go to any of those national parks and find thousands of routes that are appropriate for thousands of different types of user needs or interests once people arrive there as well.
That's amazing. So tell me more about this idea of space and place. That really intrigues me. So there's we have a yearning to get out into space, and around where we live there are lots of spaces, but once we start to engage with those spaces, they become personal places. Is that along the lines or not?
It's that you can transform a space into a place by giving it like a boundary and an identity.
Is that a mental, personal boundary?
Yes, but your boundary of that place might be different to another person's boundary,
Yes,
and
yes.
they might share the identity. But the thing is that then once it's got a name and it's got a boundary, you can start to get organized around it, and you can start creating story around it, and it takes on power. Whereas what you'll often see within cities, so close to where I live actually, right beside the Iron Bridge, beside the bridge we were talking, there's a green space that used to be where there was a house prior to the Second World War. It was bombed out and it became a space. It was never given a name. It's never given an identity. And a local resident managed to take a bite out of that space by extending their garden, saying that the council said, "Oh, it's only a small amount of green space, so who cares?" I know it happens with parks and places as well, but the community's ability to have got mobilised around that like moment would have been far higher if that space had a name and was a place, something which we're working on right now by doing different things, by giving it an identity and helping to sort of protect it in that way. So, quite often when you think about spaces, they're super exciting to go and explore and might be unknown, but spaces also tend to have like less protection as a result.
Well, this is really interesting also then in terms of what we were talking about earlier, which is about getting people out into countryside, more people having more access, beginning to then become more connected to the land and more motivated to take action to care for it and protect it, isn't it? So Slowways has a role in that.
It does, and I wonder what you were bringing up earlier around people littering or harming areas of the countryside. It would be an interesting bit of research, wouldn't it? Maybe it's been done in terms of people's relationship between spaces and places and how they identify with either it being a place or not, and if they do see it as a place, but how they might. But I think when you see fly tipping, for example, I think that's a really good example of where people sort of don't have a close affinity with a location.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think what Slowways can do then is, I mean, I certainly when I moved to Exeter from London, it helped me to develop a sense of place in a number of ways. I mean, firstly, each route begins and finishes in a town or city. It gives you a transect through the landscape, which means you experience sort of urban, peri-urban, rural, wilder spaces and then back in and out the other side. But if you do enough of these routes, you build up more of a sort of spatial framework, a sense of place for where you are. And actually within sort of traditional techniques for when you first arrive in maybe a land that you're not aware of, what people would often do is come up with a central base camp and then walk off in different directions for a few kilometers and then come back again to build up a reference for where you are in the landscape. And when we first moved to Exeter, we went out on Slowways to all the points of the compass to the different neighbouring towns, and each time we could see where we had been in the landscape previously and build up this framework. And not only did that mean that developed an understanding of where we live in Devon. I'm talking about my wife and I here. But it also meant that we felt far more connected to the landscape and far more at home because we've got to know it so intimately as well. So actually, anyone who's listening to this, I would really strongly recommend as a thing to do is walk from your house to all of your neighboring villages or towns or cities and then connect them up. And once you've done those, think about maybe going out further as well. And we've certainly got a handful of volunteers at Slowways that have walked over 4,000 kilometers of Slowways now over a 5-year period because they just started off by putting together a network locally and then they've just grown it outwards and outwards and outwards, building up this incredible sense of not just a local sense of place, but regions in the country.
Yeah, this is a fantastic way when you go to a new place to start to explore it, but also to start to see your own community through fresh eyes, isn't it? I spent a year exploring the local ordnance survey map that I live on, like 1 grid square per week, and I wrote a book about that called Local, which is brilliant, and you should buy it. And I did that project partly because I felt that I don't really like where I live. I'd rather live in the Serengeti or something. And yet now it's fantastic because when I'm in some little place, I see over there some giant pylon, and I think, oh yes, that's that pylon over by that thing. And then I've got a connection in time and space, a different way of seeing the land that I live on. There's a giant radio mast you see in different places, and so by having viewed that from all different angles and aspects, I feel that I got to know the area so much better. So if people are interested in slow ways, I mean, how far does everyone live from a slow ways path, and how do people find them? Are the signposts on the street? What do they do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I can't remember what the percentage is of total number of people who live within um, a short walk of a route. It's like 90% or something ridiculous of people live within a short walk of a slowway route somewhere because they all go into the middle of towns and cities. And so very large numbers of people are very, very close to them. Just go to the Slowways website and you can route between towns and cities, or you can find your local area or browse the map and find routes as well. But, you know, we've started off with walking, and the next phase of what we're doing, we're going to break out into being best in class for pushchairs, wheelchairs, and scooters. Going to get into cycling, running, and horse riding as well, essentially because of wanting to be as inclusive as possible across like active travel and people who are wanting to spend time outdoors. And the call to action really is that, you know, like you really enjoyed exploring your, it's an absolutely fantastic book, Local, and I love the idea of exploring all the square kilometers on your map. You know, the call to action is, we know, what if all villages, towns, and cities all created mini slowways networks for their local areas, which were intersectional with different layers, so that different groups and organizations, from nursery groups, primary schools, secondary schools, youth 3A groups, nature groups, heritage groups, dark sky groups, all these different groups creating their networks because they actually all appeal to different people for different reasons. And then we then put them all together into this giant intersectional national network of active travel routes that people can then enjoy. Linear routes, circular routes, but all through this idea of local people with local knowledge and local expertise getting out and sharing some of that knowledge and wisdom they have. We'll have to see whether it works or not. We've got a ridiculous crowdfunding target, which is necessary for the scale of what it is we're trying to achieve.
So it's June 2025. We're recording this. You've got 2 months more of crowdfund. So give us your little sales pitch of what you need money for and where we can give you the money.
Well, people can search Slowways and find the crowdfunder, and I think we'll be able to carry on giving after the crowdfund has ended as well. Essentially, we need the money so we can extend the network to include millions more people in millions more places. The current website we have is a pilot website that was built for us to build the extraordinary national network we've created so far. But it's not easy enough to use. It's not robust enough. It's not scalable enough to have a network which is so much bigger in terms of what we want to do, but critically as well, we want to, in a super affordable way, I mean, super affordable, share the abilities for charities, non-profits, schools, councils to create all their local networks as well. So if people back the campaign, they can become a member of Slowways, which gives them extra sort of features and functionality. But the big thing is, if you work for a charity, non-profit, grassroots organization, we'd absolutely love for you to be on the platform creating routes and networks. It's how we make magic happen. And you know, in many ways, it's the numbers of people who support this that matter even more than how much money we raise, because essentially it's people on the ground that are going to bring this to life.
Yeah, the more people that are involved, the better it becomes, and it feedbacks upwards like that, doesn't it?
That's exactly right, and it's also, though, I think that there's some of the people who are least represented currently in the outdoors and on paths in the countryside are the people we need most to be involved. Because for those people to be able to show all the places they're able to get to and enjoy getting to let other people like them know where they can get to too, will then increase demand and hopefully then improve physical access in the countryside as well. Because then we've got the data to show that there are all these people with this interest or this need trying to get somewhere or do something, but they can only get so far, or there isn't the connectivity. So it'd be very powerful to pull that together.
Gosh, it's amazing. It's a brilliant thing. I really like it, and not least of all, it's a very stylish, nice-looking website, which is just really nice and pleasant to use. So that, yeah, you've nailed it in many ways. It's great. So We're going to wrap up now. We've talked about lots of things, many of which on my question sheet we have not yet done, but we rambled off onto some interesting paths and byways and detours. We've talked about your National Park City project, the UK in 100 seconds video, which is great. We've talked about your slow ways, the mapping system, but also the crowdfunder. We've talked about scheduled pooing. We've covered a lot of things. Where is the best place for people to find out more about what you do, Dan Raven-Ellison, and where do you like people to connect?
I'm across no social media, but you can just Google any of the things you just described, and they'll pop up.
Yeah.
And all of them are actually invitations to get involved. Get involved with making national park cities. Get involved with getting out on doing big hikes. Get involved by showing someone Earth in 100 seconds. So they can see how we're actually using and misusing the planet. I love hearing from people, and if anyone's listening to this and got things they object with or would like to talk about how they would like to schedule their poos, then it'd be great to hear from them.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Dan. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to listen to all your ideas and your really creative way of thinking about things. So thank you very much. We started this conversation with some real technical glitches and problems and tedious Zoom type issues, which means that now me interviewing you, we're actually doing on your Zoom account. So this is the point where I say, thank you very much. That's the end. However, you are in charge of the stop recording button. So you can now choose to either stop recording, or is there any final parting thing you want to leave us with before you hit that stop button?
No, I don't think so. It's been a nice chat.
Let's
Thank
hit
you.
stop.